Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here to talk about the new Hunger Games prequel movie, A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. It just hit theaters. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. So when it comes to prequel stories, historically the odds have not always been in their favor. But 8 years after sort of the conclusion of the wildly popular Hunger Games series of films, audiences are being once again transported to the dystopian world of Panem, based on the novel. I think it came out in 2020 by Susanna Collins. It's a prequel to the Hunger Games that takes place about, I think, 65 years before the events of the stories that we all know already. And as a prequel, this film faces several challenges in order for it to work. On the one sense, it's a prequel, so it's telling a story where, as the audience, we already know sort of where this story ultimately leads. But even beyond that, this is a movie that centers in kind of on the main character of Cornelius Snow, which, if you're familiar with the original stories, we know as sort of the future ultimate big baddie in the whole series. And telling a story, getting audiences to root for a future villain is obviously a challenge. But I think despite some of those challenges, this is a film that will emerge, at least for me, from the arena as a victor, because I really, really enjoyed this movie. I think this is a great follow-up to The Hunger Games. In many ways, this is a prequel that I think is done right, that does work both as a continuation of a familiar story, but also as a tale that does tell a very gripping kind of narrative and story in its own right. For many people, kind of the allure of doing a prequel to The Hunger Games is the opportunity to sort of explore the developments that ultimately sort of led to the events that we already know. But unlike a lot of prequels, this film does restrain itself from just being a parade of sort of Easter eggs and callbacks to, hey, you remember this from those movies? Remember this character? Well, this ties up. And this film definitely does have some of those moments. There are some callbacks, and some of them are quite on the nose. But I do think overall, this film is one that is able to establish sort of its own kind of identity as a tale and not just sort of a historical backdrop to stories that we already know. And I think kind of if the original series very much explored sort of the theme of, surviving in a very corrupt world, this film centers in on the question of how do worlds get corrupt? Where does sort of that corruption come from? And kind of in that way, rather than sort of the knowledge of the original stories making this feel superfluous and unneeded, I think it actually kind of adds some potency and interest to the story. And the fact that this movie works as well as I think it does is really a testament to the strength of both the characters and then also the performers that play those characters. Because Tom Blythe plays Cornelius Snow, who's sort of the future dictator of Panem. And then we have Rachel Zegler, who plays Lucy Gray Braid, who's kind of a tribute from District 12. And both of them are excellent in this film. Because I know even when the book came out, there was some controversy about how do you tell a story about a villain? Are you just going to humanize him? Are you going to make us like him? Are you going to kind of, sugarcoat the evil of some of those actions? And this film does a great job with the characterization of Snow and striking that difficult balance of giving audiences enough reason to root for him, to be invested in sort of what he's going for and who he is as a character, while also not kind of glossing over just the evil that is obviously lurking kind of beneath the surface. And kind of similarly, Lucy is just an interesting character. Kind of unlike Katniss from the originals, she doesn't have like archery skills or just sort of physical fortitude or things to kind of aid her and kind of give her a chance in the arena. Kind of because of that, she relies instead on like music, which plays a surprisingly big role. There's a lot of songs and music in this film. And then also just sort of showmanship as a performer, as a musician. She's a character that appears very outwardly confident and in control, although you do kind of get glimpses beneath sort of the cracks in that performance that there is sort of a softer vulnerability and kind of hurt beneath the surface. And kind of because of sort of some of those elements, she never, at least to me, came across as sort of just another Katniss, just sort of the new version of Katniss, that she really does stand alone as sort of a compelling character. And as with the original stories, this movie is also, as could probably be expected, it's brutal, it's violent, it's grim and moody. Just the concept of throwing kids in a kind of a gladiator's arena and just having them murder each other, fight to the death, is intentionally horrifying. And while the film does restrain itself. This is a PG-13 rated film, so that you don't necessarily see a bunch of just blood or like gratuitously depicted violence. The carnage and the violence in this is very visceral. It is sort of intentionally unsettling, but it does feel purposeful. It doesn't feel like it's just sort of empty, empty bloodbath. It does feel like it kind of the violence is the point of this film. Because personally, kind of one of the reasons why these films are interesting to me is there is sort of that contrast that as a viewer, you're sort of watching and being horrified by the fact that these sort of capital citizens are just, watching, the violence in front of them as this pure spectacle and entertainment. Well, at the same time, you're sitting in a comfortable theater with a bowl of popcorn, and some M&Ms, and you're also watching sort of violence as a spectacle. And I do think that kind of the intrigue of this film is that it does sort of place you in that situation and ask, hey, what would I do in that situation? And I think it does challenge a bit of, hey, despite sort of maybe our noble aspirations, maybe we wouldn't act the way that we think we would. But maybe one area where this film isn't necessarily as successful is just the pacing. And in a lot of ways, I think that can be traced back to just the source material. Obviously, it's a long book. There's more time to tell that story. The movie's condensing the material. And the movie itself is divided into 3 parts. And so each part is distinguished by like a title card on set. And kind of the first 2 parts of this film take place in the Capitol and center in on like the events of the Hunger Games. And then the third part, kind of the end, kind of shifts gears and moves back to the districts and tells a very different kind of story. And where I think kind of the first 2 acts in this are very, they're just gripping, they're kind of edge of your seat, just there's breakneck speed, just a whole lot happening. It does lose a lot of momentum when it does shift to that kind of new setting, as it's forced to kind of slow down and reestablish a new setting and introduce new characters and try and kind of build a very different kind of tension. And kind of as a result, it does end up feeling like a longer movie. This is over 2 hours. And because the last part is sort of the slowest part, it does feel like it starts to drag a little bit. And while it ultimately does lead to a very thrilling, exciting conclusion, kind of last moments of this film, it does feel this a little bit rushed, a little bit kind of unearned because of sort of the stop-start of just sort of shifting those acts. As far as content to consider, things going on the surface of this. Language, no, there's no real language. There's one minor profanity, and then I think one character says the word piss. But other than that, there's no swearing. Sexuality, nothing really here either. There is a comment about referring to Lucy. There is an older kind of lady character that makes the comment that, that child, she hasn't been a child for a long time. And that can refer to many things. It doesn't have to be sexual, although that is definitely one of those, based on some of her backstory, one of those possible interpretations of that. Maybe one other thing, there is kind of a female character, Tigress, who is Cornelius Snow's kind of cousin and very close friend. And although it's a female character, it is performed by a transgender performer. Violence, obviously this is where most of the content stuff comes from, because you do get violence of a PG-13 variety, but a lot of it is more like implied or kind of unsettling. Like there's a character shown in the very start of this film who is shown like about to chop up a corpse and kind of do cannibalistic intentions based on the hunger and the war. And then the Hunger Games itself features kids killing each other, and you see that depicted on screen. And characters get stabbed with pitchforks and hacked and poisoned and get crushed. And so there's violence throughout, although for the most part, you don't see there's a lot of like blood in the thing. It's more implied. And there's one other kind of violent moment where a character is kind of stabbed in the neck with like a broken bottle, and you do see some of the blood, and she ultimately dies. So again, there's violence, although I think it is sort of appropriate to the story that it's telling. As far as themes, things going on beneath the surface of this is a film that explores human nature and whether we're sort of naturally good and we get corrupted, or whether we're all born corrupted. And that is sort of the tension that this film holds all throughout this film without ever really resolving that. Sort of this idea of like, do the Hunger Games and just society in general, does that corrupt innocent people? And the impact of the world around us that sort of makes people bad, makes people selfish, makes people violent? Or do the Hunger Games merely just bring out sort of this internal, corruption that's already inside, just waiting for a chance to sort of break loose. And you kind of get both of those perspectives on display in this film, because there's the kind of the unhinged game maker who's played greatly by actress Viola Davis, and she sort of advocates for that first perspective. She refers to the Hunger Games, like in the arena is where you see humanity unmasked, is how she puts it. And kind of the idea that we're all bad, we're all evil. All we need is sort of that push to descend. And you kind of see that on display. There's a scene where Cornelius Snow is forced into the arena, and he, kind of temporarily and through different circumstances results in him kind of killing someone for the first time. And you sort of see him wrestle with that. In one sense, he's horrified by it, but in the other sense, he's almost intoxicated by it. He refers to explaining it to someone else that it feels like power. And you kind of see some of that dynamic, that it's pulling out some of that evilness within him. But representing kind of the other side, the more optimistic side about human nature, is Lucy. There's a scene kind of near the end where she's talking to Snow and kind of gives her perspective that she believes that all people are born naturally good, that we're all innocent, and it's just sort of the world that kind of corrupts, kind of outside pressures that corrupt us. Because one of the songs that she sings in this film kind of captures that idea. The opening lyrics are, "Everyone's born as clean as a whistle, as fresh as a daisy, and not a bit crazy. Staying that way is a hard row of hoeing, as rough as a briar, like walking through fire." And that kind of summarizes sort of her perspective of that. And I think ultimately this film never does resolve that tension. It does sort of keep both of those perspectives and kind of challenges the viewer to work through that in their own sense. I think obviously as an audience, we want to align with Lucy, sort of more the optimistic perspective on that. Although I think as Christians, kind of when we look to scripture, it does seem that Snow's the more kind of pessimistic perspective is sort of closer in line with the biblical truth. Think of like the Apostle Paul in Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Or even the words of Jesus where he says, "Why do you call me good? No one is good except for God alone." This idea that we are naturally evil, that we are bad, that we can't sort of overcome our evil. So I think there is, although this film, Panem isn't really a world where anyone references God or any religion, kind of spiritual forces, I think the concepts that it's wrestling with definitely are applicable to Christians. So in the end, I think this is a good movie. I really enjoyed this movie. I think a lot of prequels don't work. I think this is a prequel that does work. Is it as good as sort of as engrossing as the Jennifer Lawrence led originals? I don't think so. But I also never got the sense that this was just sort of a corporate cash grab for some studio to like milk more money out of a dormant franchise. It does feel like it has an interesting story to tell, and it tells it in a way that is kind of consistently captivating. But hey, if you guys check out this movie, would love to hear if you enjoyed it as much as I did, or maybe if you didn't, if you had some problems with it, or how you wrestled with some of the kind of the themes that it explores about kind of human nature. Would love to have a conversation with you, so jump in the comment section about that. If you haven't done so, I encourage you guys to subscribe to our channel, become a Collider. I got a lot of fun stuff, movie reviews and podcasts, and just love to have you be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thank you for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.